For most of human history, women had periods exactly like today. The difference was that pads didn't exist. No pharmacies, no supermarket shelves, no disposable products, no colorful packages promising comfort and protection. And that raises a question most people never think about. What did women actually do before modern pads were invented? The answer is far stranger than most people imagine, because for thousands of years, women around the world were forced to solve the same problem in completely different ways. Some used pieces of cloth that had to be washed and reused again and again. Others relied on wool, plant fibers, or materials that sound almost unbelievable today. In some places, women created surprisingly clever solutions long before modern medicine understood how the body worked. And in other places, many women had almost no practical solution at all. What's even stranger is that one of the biggest changes in menstrual hygiene didn't come from doctors studying women's health. It came from a completely different problem, a problem connected to war, wounded soldiers, and a material that was never supposed to be used this way. The story of modern pads is not really about hygiene. It's a story about silence, invention, embarrassment, business, and millions of women trying to solve a problem that society often refused to discuss. And once you see what women actually used before pads existed, you'll realize that one ordinary monthly reality quietly changed medicine, advertising, manufacturing, and everyday life in ways most people never notice. If you're enjoying these hidden stories from history, subscribe now. Some of the strangest facts ever discovered are still ahead. Most people believe the history of menstrual products is simple and predictable. They imagine that women always had some early version of modern pads, and that each generation slowly improved what the previous generation had created. That version of the story sounds reasonable, but it hides something much stranger. The truth is that modern disposable pads are incredibly new compared to the length of human history. If all of human civilization were compressed into a single year, disposable pads would appear only during the final moments before midnight. For thousands of years before that moment, women still had periods every month, but the products that fill store shelves today simply did not exist. What makes this even more surprising is that there was never one universal solution. Different societies developed different methods, and many women spent their entire lives using systems that would seem shocking today. Modern advertisements create the impression that menstrual hygiene products have always been common household items. In reality, most of the products people recognize today are younger than their grandparents. Even the idea of openly discussing periods in public is surprisingly recent. For much of history, menstruation was treated as something private, embarrassing, or even dangerous. Many families never discussed it openly. Many schools never taught it properly. Many doctors misunderstood it completely. Because of that silence, millions of women were forced to solve the same problem with very little guidance. One of the strangest parts of this story is how little evidence survived. Historians can easily study swords, coins, buildings, and government records because those objects were considered important. Menstrual products rarely received the same attention. Most were made from ordinary materials that were reused, worn out, washed repeatedly, and eventually thrown away. As a result, some of the most common experiences in women's lives left surprisingly few physical traces behind. This creates a strange situation where historians often know more about ancient weapons than about the monthly realities experienced by half the population. That missing evidence helped create many myths. One popular belief claims that women in the distant past all used cloth rags. The reality was much more complicated. Some certainly did. Others used different materials depending on where they lived and what they could afford. Wealthy women often had options unavailable to poor women. Rural communities developed different solutions than crowded cities. Some methods were surprisingly effective. Others were uncomfortable, inconvenient, or unreliable. There was no single answer because there was no single world. The experience could change dramatically from one region to another. Another common myth suggests that women simply stayed home during their periods. That idea falls apart almost immediately when viewed against history. Women worked in fields, managed businesses, traveled long distances, raised families, and participated in daily life. Ancient civilizations did not pause every month. Medieval towns did not stop operating. Factories during the Industrial Revolution did not close because workers were menstruating. Women still had responsibilities, obligations, and jobs that required practical solutions. The challenge was not avoiding life. The challenge was finding ways to continue living it. As the centuries passed, this challenge became even more complicated. Growing cities placed people closer together. Factories introduced long working hours. Public transportation became more common. Schools expanded. office work increased. Every change created new situations where women needed reliable protection. Yet society often refused to discuss the problem openly. This produced a strange contradiction. Millions of women shared the same monthly experience, but many were expected to act as though nothing was happening. Entire industries grew while avoiding direct language. Advertisements used coded phrases instead of clear explanations. Products were sold discreetly. Conversations happened quietly. The need was universal, but public discussion remained limited. This silence shaped the development of menstrual products for generations. The most successful inventions were not always the most comfortable or effective. Sometimes, they were simply the products people felt least embarrassed buying. That may sound surprising today, but embarrassment influenced entire markets. Companies learned that public attitudes could be just as important as technology. A better product did not guarantee success if customers felt uncomfortable discussing it. As a result, the history of menstrual hygiene became a story about much more than periods. It became a story about business, culture, medicine, advertising, and social expectations. Every improvement had to overcome more than a practical problem. It also had to overcome decades of silence. Yet the strangest twist is still ahead. Most people assume the breakthrough that changed everything came from doctors researching women's health. That assumption seems logical because menstrual products solve a health and hygiene problem. But the invention that transformed the industry arrived from an entirely different direction. It emerged because people were trying to solve another problem altogether. The chain of events that eventually changed the lives of millions began far away from hospitals, schools, and family home. It started with an unexpected material, an unexpected situation, and a discovery nobody originally intended to make. Before that breakthrough arrived, women across the world relied on solutions that ranged from clever and practical to uncomfortable and astonishing. Some methods survived for centuries. Others disappeared almost completely from memory. Together, they reveal a hidden history that most people never learn, despite the fact that it affected billions of lives. And once that forgotten story begins to unfold, the path leading to modern pads becomes far stranger than anyone expects. Long before stores sold pads and tampons, women faced the same monthly reality that exists today. The difference was that they had to solve the problem themselves using whatever materials were available around them. The story begins much earlier than most people imagine. It reaches back into ancient civilizations where writing was still developing, and many basic medical questions remained unanswered. Yet, even in those distant centuries, women were already creating practical solutions, because waiting for science was never an option. One of the earliest places where historians found clues is ancient Egypt. Egyptian society left behind records describing medicine, daily life, and personal care. Among these clues are references suggesting that some women used softened papyrus as a form of menstrual protection. Papyrus was already used for writing and other practical purposes, making it a material people understood well. While the exact methods remain debated, the important detail is that Egyptian women were clearly searching for ways to manage menstruation thousands of years before modern products existed. What makes this remarkable is that they were solving a problem that doctors still barely understood. Ancient medicine often mixed observation with superstition. Treatments were frequently based on tradition rather than evidence. Yet women still needed solutions every month, regardless of what physicians believed. The same pattern appeared in ancient Greece. Greek doctors tried to explain menstruation through theories that sound strange today. Among the most influential figures was Hippocrates, whose ideas shaped medicine for centuries. He attempted to understand the female body using the knowledge available at the time, but many conclusions were incorrect. Menstruation was often viewed as a way for the body to remove excess substances. Some physicians believed menstrual blood carried dangerous properties. Others blamed various illnesses on disruptions to the menstrual cycle. These explanations influenced generations of medical thinking, even though many were wrong. While scholars debated theories, women focused on practical survival. They still had families to care for and daily responsibilities to complete. Philosophical discussions did not solve the immediate challenge they faced each month. Ancient Greece also reveals another important truth. Menstrual experiences often depended on wealth. Wealthy households could afford better fabrics and more resources. Poor families had fewer choices and relied heavily on whatever materials were nearby. This difference would continue throughout history. The quality of a woman's solution often depended less on technology and more on economic status. The Roman world inherited many Greek medical ideas while expanding across enormous territories. Roman women lived in cities, villages, military settlements, and distant provinces. Their circumstances varied widely, which meant their methods varied as well. Some evidence suggests the use of wool and cloth materials. Wool was common throughout many parts of the Roman world and could be adapted for different purposes. Cloth could be folded, layered, washed, and reused. None of these options resembled modern disposable products, but they represented practical attempts to address a recurring problem. What stands out is how much effort women invested in creating solutions despite limited resources. The challenge was not occasional. It returned every month for decades. Even small improvements could make daily life significantly easier. Beyond the Mediterranean world, women developed their own approaches. In parts of Asia, historical records suggest the use of paper-based materials centuries before disposable pads appeared in Western markets. Some women created layered systems designed for repeated use. Others adapted local textiles and fibers. These inventions emerged independently because the problem itself was universal. Women separated by thousands of miles often arrived at similar conclusions. They searched for absorbent materials, secure methods of holding them in place, and ways to clean reusable items. The details differed, but the goal remained the same. One of the strangest aspects of this history is how often women's knowledge remained invisible. Men wrote many surviving historical records, and their interests frequently focused elsewhere. Wars, rulers, trade routes, and political disputes filled official documents. Everyday solutions created by women rarely received the same attention. As a result, some of the most important innovations were passed through families rather than preserved in books. Mothers taught daughters, older relatives shared practical advice, communities developed local customs. Much of that knowledge survived through experience instead of written records. This hidden exchange of information helped women adapt even when formal medicine offered little assistance. At the same time, misconceptions about menstruation spread across many societies. Certain cultures imposed restrictions during menstrual periods. Others associated menstruation with religious rules or social taboos. These beliefs sometimes created additional difficulties for women already managing a physical challenge. Instead of receiving support, they were occasionally treated as though they carried a problem that needed to be hidden. The result was a strange contradiction. Menstruation was one of the most common human experiences, yet many societies treated it as something that should remain unseen. That attitude would shape the future for centuries. As civilizations grew larger, the demand for practical solutions increased. Cities became more crowded, travel became more common, markets expanded. Women participated in economic life in countless ways, whether through trade, agriculture, family businesses, or skilled work. The need for reliable menstrual management became increasingly important. Yet progress remained slow because there was no industry dedicated to solving the problem. Every woman largely depended on personal knowledge, local materials, and family traditions. There were no major companies competing to create better products. There were no research laboratories focused on menstrual hygiene. There were only individuals solving a recurring challenge with whatever resources they possessed. This reality persisted for generations. Century after century, women adapted, improvised, and shared techniques. Some solutions disappeared completely from history. Others survived long enough to influence future inventions. Together, they formed a hidden chain of experimentation, stretching across thousands of years. What appears from a distance to be a simple story about hygiene was actually a long process of problem-solving carried out by millions of women. Their efforts laid the foundation for everything that came later. Yet the next chapter would reveal something even stranger. The methods people assume were common throughout history may not have been as universal as they seem. In fact, one of the most popular beliefs about how women managed periods before modern products may be completely wrong. By the Middle Ages, menstruation was still a normal part of life, but something strange happened to the historical record. The further historians looked into medieval Europe, the fewer clear answers they found. This created one of the most unusual mysteries in the history of women's health. Millions of women experienced periods every month, yet surprisingly little detailed information survived about exactly how they managed them. Most people believe the answer is obvious. They assume medieval women simply used cloth rags, washed them, and reused them. That explanation appears in countless books, articles, and conversations. It sounds logical because reusable cloth remained common even centuries later. The problem is that historians searching for evidence discovered something unexpected. The proof was not nearly as clear as many people assumed. Very few medieval menstrual cloths survived. Very few written descriptions explained exactly how they were used. Very few records discussed the subject openly. The result was a puzzle that continues to fascinate researchers today. Some historians argue that reusable cloths were common and simply failed to survive because fabric wears out over time. That explanation makes sense. Most ordinary clothing from the Middle Ages disappeared as well. Poor families reused fabric until it literally fell apart. A cloth designed for menstrual use would likely have been washed repeatedly and eventually discarded. Under those conditions, physical evidence would be extremely rare. Yet another group of historians noticed something equally strange. Household records, personal letters, and surviving documents often failed to mention menstrual cloths directly. Considering how important they would have been, the silence seemed unusual. This led some researchers to explore a different possibility. They suggested that many women may not have relied on separate menstrual products at all. Instead, they may have used layers of clothing and undergarments designed to absorb or conceal bleeding. This theory surprised many people because it challenged a belief that had existed for generations. Suddenly, the story became far more complicated than simple cloth pads. The medieval world itself helps explain why. Clothing was very different from modern clothing. Many women wore multiple layers of fabric each day. Dresses, shifts, underskirts, and other garments created a structure unlike anything most people wear today. These layers could potentially provide a level of absorption without requiring a separate dedicated product. Wealthier women owned more clothing and could change garments more frequently. Poor women often had fewer options and relied on whatever resources were available. Once again, economic status shaped the experience. What worked for one woman might be impossible for another. The deeper historians investigated, the stranger the picture became. Menstruation was clearly common, yet direct discussion remained limited. Medical texts from the period often focused on theories rather than practical advice. Many physicians inherited ideas from ancient writers and repeated beliefs that were centuries old. Menstrual blood was sometimes described in ways that reflected fear and misunderstanding. Certain medical writers treated it as a mysterious substance capable of affecting health, emotions, or even the surrounding environment. These beliefs sound bizarre today, but they influenced social attitudes for generations. Women often had to navigate not only the physical reality of menstruation, but also a collection of myths surrounding it. Some communities imposed restrictions during menstrual periods. Others viewed menstruation through religious or cultural traditions. Different regions developed different customs, creating a patchwork of beliefs across Europe and beyond. While scholars debated theories, women focused on practical solutions. Daily life did not pause because doctors lacked accurate information. Women still worked, traveled, managed households, cared for children, and participated in local economies. Medieval towns depended on women's labor. Farms depended on women's labor. Families depended on women's labor. The monthly challenge had to be managed somehow because ordinary responsibilities continued regardless. One particularly revealing clue comes from laundry. Washing clothes in the medieval period required significant effort. Water had to be carried, fabrics had to be scrubbed. Drying took time. Nothing about laundry was easy. This reality suggests that any reusable menstrual solution required a serious commitment of labor. Every piece of cloth needed cleaning. Every garment required maintenance. Even simple hygiene demanded work that modern people rarely consider. The amount of effort involved helps explain why practical solutions mattered so much. Small improvements could save hours of labor over time. Another surprising detail involves secrecy. Many aspects of women's health remained private because discussing them openly was considered inappropriate. Knowledge often passed from one generation to the next without written instructions. Mothers taught daughters, sisters helped sisters. Female relatives shared advice that never appeared in official records. This created an invisible network of information operating alongside formal institutions. Men controlled many written records, but women preserved practical knowledge through experience. Much of that knowledge disappeared because it was rarely documented. As a result, historians often reconstruct the story using fragments instead of complete explanations. This uncertainty created one of the biggest myths in popular history. People often imagine that everyone in the Middle Ages lived the same way. The reality was dramatically different. A wealthy merchant's daughter in a large city lived differently from a farmer's wife in a remote village. A noblewoman possessed resources unavailable to most people. Regional customs varied widely. Economic circumstances varied widely. Available materials varied widely. There was never a single medieval experience. There were thousands of different experiences shaped by local conditions. The more researchers studied the period, the clearer this became. The history of menstruation was not a story with one answer. It was a story of adaptation. Women constantly adjusted to the resources available around them. They improvised, experimented, and developed methods suited to their circumstances. Some techniques remained within families for generations. Others disappeared without leaving a trace. Yet beneath all those differences, one pattern remained constant. Society expected women to manage the challenge quietly, Menstruation affected daily life, but public discussion remained limited. That expectation of silence would survive long after the Middle Ages ended. In fact, it would become even more powerful as cities expanded and new industries emerged. Because the next great change in this story would not come from doctors or scholars. It would come from a world increasingly obsessed with productivity, work, and efficiency. And that world would eventually create the first recognizable ancestors of modern menstrual products. The 19th century changed almost everything about daily life, and menstruation was no exception. For thousands of years, women had mostly relied on local materials, family traditions, and personal improvisation. Now, a new force began reshaping society. Cities were growing larger every decade. Factories employed millions of workers. Schools expanded. Offices hired more women than ever before. Public transportation connected neighborhoods that had once remained separate. These changes created a problem that previous generations rarely faced on the same scale. Women were spending longer hours away from home and needed solutions that could function throughout an entire workday. The old methods were becoming harder to manage in a rapidly changing world. A woman working 12 hours in a textile factory could not simply return home whenever necessary. A student attending classes faced different challenges than her grandmother. A shop employee standing behind a counter all day needed reliability that many older methods could not provide. As society changed, menstruation became more than a private issue. It became a practical problem connected to work, education, and public life. This pressure pushed women toward new forms of experimentation. One of the most common solutions involved reusable cloth pads. These were usually handmade rather than purchased. Women cut pieces of fabric, folded them into layers, and created absorbent inserts that could be washed and reused. Some households developed their own preferred designs. Others passed specific techniques between generations. While these cloth pads represented an improvement for many women, they introduced a new challenge. Keeping them securely in place was not easy. Modern adhesive strips did not exist. Disposable products did not exist. Women needed another invention to make reusable pads practical. That invention became known as the menstrual belt. Today, the idea sounds unusual, but for decades, menstrual belts were considered normal. The basic concept was simple: a belt wrapped around the waist while straps extended downward to hold absorbent materials in position. Different manufacturers produced different versions. Some used buttons, others used clips. Some attempted to improve comfort while others focused on security. None were especially elegant by modern standards, but they solved an important problem. For the first time, women had systems specifically designed for menstruation, rather than improvised household solutions. This marked an important shift in history. Menstruation was beginning to attract commercial attention. Inventors noticed an opportunity. Entrepreneurs noticed an opportunity. Companies noticed an opportunity. Throughout the late 19th century, patents related to menstrual products began appearing with increasing frequency. Many inventors believed they had finally created the perfect design. Most disappeared quickly. Others achieved limited success. What makes these patents fascinating is how inventive people became when trying to solve a recurring problem. Some designs used elaborate fastening systems. Others incorporated special pockets or layered absorbent sections. A few inventions look surprisingly modern when viewed today. Many others appear awkward and complicated. Together, they reveal a period of intense experimentation. Nobody had found the ideal solution yet, but people were actively searching for it. At the same time, social attitudes remained stubbornly resistant to open discussion. This created one of the strangest contradictions in the entire story. Companies wanted to sell products. Customers needed products. Yet many people felt uncomfortable talking about the very problem those products addressed. Advertisements often relied on indirect language. Instead of clearly discussing menstruation, marketers used phrases suggesting comfort, cleanliness, or feminine well-being. The actual purpose sometimes remained hidden beneath layers of polite wording. This strategy reflected broader social expectations. Menstruation was increasingly becoming a commercial market, but many people still treated it as something that should never be mentioned directly. Women found themselves caught between growing consumer culture and persistent silence. Another important development occurred inside department stores and mail-order catalogs. These businesses allowed women to purchase products with greater privacy. Instead of relying entirely on local merchants, customers could order items through catalogs and receive them without public discussion. This may seem like a small change, but it mattered enormously. Privacy encouraged experimentation. Women who felt embarrassed discussing menstrual products face-to-face now had another option. As distribution improved, new products reached more households. The market slowly expanded. Yet despite all these innovations, many problems remained unsolved. Reusable cloth products required constant washing. Menstrual belts could be uncomfortable. Some designs shifted during movement. Others proved difficult to clean properly. Women continued searching for better alternatives because existing options demanded significant effort. The average menstrual routine still involved washing, drying, storing, and maintaining reusable materials. Convenience remained limited. This reality became especially important as women entered new areas of public life. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, increasing numbers of women attended schools, worked outside the home, and participated in social activities that demanded mobility. The desire for more practical solutions continued growing. Inventors responded with new designs, but progress remained gradual. Every improvement solved one problem while creating another. Better absorption often meant greater bulk. Increased security sometimes reduced comfort. The perfect balance remained elusive. Yet the most important change during this period was not technological. It was psychological. For the first time, large numbers of people began treating menstrual hygiene as a specific category of products rather than a private household challenge. That shift opened the door for future innovation. Once companies recognized a market, research accelerated. Once customers expected dedicated products, competition increased. Once inventors focused on menstruation as a design problem, new ideas emerged more rapidly. The chain reaction had begun. A challenge that women had managed privately for thousands of years was slowly becoming an industry. But despite all this experimentation, the breakthrough that transformed everything still had not arrived. The products of the 19th century were important stepping stones, yet none completely changed the experience. The invention that would finally revolutionize menstrual hygiene would emerge from a place nobody expected. It would not come from fashion. It would not come from household manufacturing. It would not come from traditional medicine. Instead, it would appear during one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, when people were desperately searching for ways to save wounded soldiers on the battlefield. And that unexpected connection would change the lives of millions of women around the world. By the early 20th century, women had spent thousands of years adapting to menstruation with whatever materials were available. Reusable cloth products had become common in many places, menstrual belts were spreading, and inventors continued searching for better solutions. Yet none of these developments truly transformed daily life. The breakthrough that changed everything arrived from a completely unexpected direction. It began not in a laboratory focused on women's health, but in the middle of a global war. When World War I erupted in 1914, governments and manufacturers suddenly faced enormous new challenges. Millions of soldiers were fighting across Europe, and military doctors desperately needed better medical supplies. One of the biggest problems involved treating wounded men quickly and efficiently. Traditional cotton worked, but huge quantities were required. Manufacturers began experimenting with alternative materials that could absorb large amounts of blood, while remaining relatively inexpensive to produce. Among the companies involved was Kimberly-Clark, an American paper products manufacturer. The company developed a material known as Cellucotton. It was created from processed wood pulp and possessed an unusual ability to absorb liquids. In fact, it could absorb significantly more fluid than ordinary cotton. Military medical personnel quickly recognized its value. Cellucotton became useful for surgical dressings and battlefield bandages because it helped manage severe bleeding. The material performed exactly as intended. It helped medical workers care for wounded soldiers during one of the largest conflicts in history. At first glance, this appears to have nothing to do with menstrual hygiene. Yet this is where the story takes its most unexpected turn. During the war, many nurses worked closely with these medical supplies every day. They handled Cellucotton constantly and became familiar with its remarkable absorbent qualities. At some point, a simple observation began spreading among nurses. If the material could absorb blood from battlefield injuries so effectively, perhaps it could also help manage menstruation. This idea did not come from executives sitting in corporate offices. It emerged from women who personally understood the problem and recognized a practical solution when they saw one. Nurses quietly began using surplus Cellucotton for their own menstrual needs. What happened next revealed just how significant the discovery was. The material worked extremely well. It absorbed more fluid than many traditional alternatives and could be discarded after use. For women accustomed to washing and reusing cloth products, this represented a dramatic change. The convenience alone made a powerful impression. A product designed for wounded soldiers had unexpectedly become one of the most promising menstrual solutions ever created. The war eventually ended, but the discovery remained. Kimberly-Clark suddenly faced a new challenge. Demand for wartime medical supplies declined sharply after the conflict. The company needed new markets for its manufacturing capacity. At the same time, reports about women's use of Cellucotton continued attracting attention. Company leaders realized they might be looking at an entirely new business opportunity. This realization would reshape the future of menstrual hygiene. In 1920, Kimberly-Clark introduced a product called Kotex. The name came from a shortened form of cotton-like texture. It became one of the first widely marketed disposable menstrual pads. Today that may not sound revolutionary, but at the time it represented a major shift. Women no longer had to rely exclusively on reusable cloth products. For the first time, a commercially produced, disposable option became available on a large scale. The concept changed expectations almost immediately. Yet success was not guaranteed. In fact, one of the biggest obstacles had nothing to do with engineering or manufacturing. The problem was embarrassment. Many women felt uncomfortable purchasing menstrual products in public. Store clerks were often men. Discussions about menstruation remained awkward. Even customers interested in the new product sometimes hesitated to buy it. The situation became so unusual that certain stores developed special purchasing systems. Instead of speaking directly to a cashier, customers could place money into a box and take a package of Kotex without discussion. This allowed women to avoid saying the product name aloud. The arrangement sounds almost unbelievable today, but it reflected social attitudes of the era. The technology had changed faster than the culture surrounding it. Despite these challenges, the new product continued spreading. Word of mouth helped introduce disposable pads to more women. Advertisements promoted convenience and cleanliness while carefully avoiding language considered too direct. Marketing teams walked a delicate line. They needed customers to understand the product without openly discussing menstruation. This balancing act influenced advertising for decades. Yet beneath the cautious language, something important was happening. Millions of women were gaining access to a solution unlike anything previous generations had known. The impact extended beyond hygiene itself. Disposable pads reduced the time required for washing reusable materials. They offered greater convenience during travel. They simplified daily routines for many working women. Small improvements accumulated into meaningful changes. What began as an accidental discovery during wartime slowly transformed everyday life. The story also revealed an important pattern that appears throughout history. Major innovations often emerge from unexpected places. The people creating Cellucotton were trying to solve a battlefield problem. They were not attempting to reinvent menstrual hygiene. The nurses who experimented with the material recognized an opportunity that manufacturers had not originally imagined. Their practical experience connected two completely different worlds. One involved military medicine. The other involved a challenge women had managed for thousands of years. That connection created an entirely new industry. Yet even this breakthrough did not end the story. Disposable pads represented a major advance, but many social barriers remained. Public discussion continued to be limited. Misconceptions persisted. Advertising still relied on careful wording. Women had gained a powerful new tool, but the culture surrounding menstruation remained deeply uncomfortable. In some ways, the battle over attitudes was only beginning. The invention itself had arrived. Convincing society to treat menstruation as a normal topic would prove far more difficult. And that struggle would shape the next chapter of the story just as much as the product itself. The arrival of disposable pads solved one problem, but it exposed another. Women finally had access to a product specifically designed for menstruation, yet society still behaved as though menstruation should remain invisible. This created one of the strangest situations in modern consumer history. Millions of women needed these products every month, but companies often felt unable to explain openly what the products actually did. The invention existed, the customers existed, the demand existed. What remained uncertain was whether society was ready to discuss the subject honestly. During the 1920s and 1930s, manufacturers invested heavily in advertising. They needed women to trust an entirely new kind of product, yet direct language about menstruation remained controversial. Advertisements often focused on confidence, comfort, freedom, and modern living. Images showed smiling women participating in daily activities. The message was clear, even when the wording was careful. These products promised something previous generations rarely enjoyed. They promised greater control over everyday life. For many women, that promise mattered just as much as the product itself. A woman attending school, working in an office, or traveling by train wanted reliability. Disposable pads offered convenience that reusable products struggled to match. As adoption increased, an important cultural shift began. Menstruation slowly moved from a private household challenge into the world of mass consumer products. Yet public discomfort remained remarkably strong. In some stores, women still preferred discreet purchasing methods. Many customers avoided conversations about menstrual products whenever possible. Certain advertisements never used words that modern audiences would consider normal. Companies developed entire marketing strategies around avoiding embarrassment. Looking back, it seems almost unbelievable that such a common experience could generate so much anxiety. Yet these attitudes shaped the industry for decades. The scale of the market continued growing because the need was universal. Every generation of women faced the same biological reality. As populations increased and urban life expanded, the number of customers grew alongside them. Manufacturers recognized that menstrual hygiene products represented one of the most consistent consumer markets imaginable. Unlike many products, the demand repeated month after month. This encouraged further investment and innovation. Companies competed to improve absorption, comfort, and convenience. New materials appeared, designs evolved, production methods improved. What had begun as an accidental wartime discovery gradually became a sophisticated industry. Another major shift occurred during the middle decades of the 20th century. Increasing numbers of women entered universities, professional careers, and public life. Their expectations changed alongside their opportunities. Products that seemed revolutionary in 1920 sometimes appeared outdated a generation later. Customers wanted better performance and greater comfort. Manufacturers responded by introducing new technologies and refining existing designs. Competition accelerated progress. Each improvement encouraged another. The result was a steady cycle of innovation that transformed menstrual hygiene far more rapidly than at any previous point in history. Yet the influence of these products extended beyond personal convenience. Better menstrual hygiene helped remove barriers that had limited participation in education and work. This effect was not always dramatic or immediately visible. Instead, it appeared through countless small improvements. Missing fewer days of school mattered. Working more comfortably mattered. Traveling more easily mattered. Participating in public life with greater confidence mattered. When multiplied across millions of women, these small advantages produced enormous social consequences. The impact reached far beyond bathrooms and medicine cabinets. It influenced economic opportunities, educational experiences, and daily routines around the world. The story became even larger during the second half of the 20th century. Global manufacturing expanded dramatically. International trade connected markets that had once remained separate. Products developed in one country could now reach consumers across continents. As distribution networks improved, menstrual hygiene products became available to growing numbers of women. This expansion revealed an important truth. The challenge that ancient Egyptian women faced thousands of years earlier still existed. The materials had changed, the technology had changed, the businesses had changed, yet the underlying need remained exactly the same. Human biology had not changed. Only the solutions had evolved. The contrast between ancient and modern approaches became increasingly striking. Earlier generations often relied on local materials gathered from their surroundings. Modern products emerged from large factories using specialized manufacturing processes. Earlier solutions depended on family knowledge passed between generations. Modern solutions relied on scientific testing, industrial design, and international marketing campaigns. Earlier women frequently created their own products. Modern consumers could choose among countless brands competing for their attention. The transformation was extraordinary, yet it happened so gradually that many people barely noticed its scale. By the late 20th century, menstrual hygiene had become a massive global industry worth billions of dollars. This development would have seemed impossible to most people living a few centuries earlier. The same subject that had once been hidden behind silence now supported research laboratories, manufacturing plants, advertising campaigns, and international corporations. Entire careers existed because of a problem women had been solving privately for thousands of years. The scale of the transformation reveals something important about history. Small, everyday challenges often influence society more deeply than dramatic political events. Wars capture headlines. Elections attract attention. Famous leaders dominate history books. Yet the need to manage menstruation affected billions of lives across thousands of years. Its influence reached into medicine, manufacturing, education, retail, advertising, and public health. Few people think about this connection when purchasing a package from a store shelf. Yet that ordinary purchase sits at the end of a remarkably long historical chain. A chain stretching from ancient civilizations through medieval households, industrial factories, battlefield hospitals, and modern corporations. What began as a monthly challenge evolved into one of the largest and most important consumer industries in the world. And once the full scale of that transformation becomes visible, the story stops being about a single product. It becomes a story about how one universal human experience quietly reshaped entire parts of modern society. Looking back across thousands of years, the strangest part of this story is not what women used before pads existed. The strangest part is how little most people know about a problem that affected half of humanity. Entire civilizations rose and disappeared, while women continued solving the same monthly challenge generation after generation. Empires fought wars, kings gained and lost power, borders changed constantly. Yet every month, millions of women still needed practical solutions, whether society paid attention or not. That reality connected women separated by centuries, cultures, and continents. An ancient Egyptian woman, a medieval farmer, a factory worker from the 19th century, and a modern office employee lived in completely different worlds, yet all of them faced the same biological reality. What changed over time was not the problem itself. What changed were the tools available to manage it. At the beginning of this story, women depended almost entirely on local material. They worked with cloth, fibers, wool, paper, and whatever resources their communities could provide. Knowledge moved slowly because information traveled slowly. Solutions were often passed from mothers to daughters and from one generation to the next. Many of those techniques vanished before anyone recorded them. Some survived only through scattered clues hidden inside historical records. Others disappeared completely. The result is a hidden history filled with missing pieces. Yet even those missing pieces reveal something important. Women were constantly adapting. They were inventing, improving, and solving problems long before companies entered the picture. As the centuries passed, those personal solutions gradually evolved into commercial products. The transition happened so slowly that most people never notice it. A challenge once handled inside homes eventually became an industry worth billions of dollars. The path from folded cloth to modern disposable products took thousands of years. Few technologies followed such a long and unusual journey. What makes the story even more remarkable is where the biggest breakthrough came from. Most people expect major advances in women's health to originate from doctors, hospitals, or scientific research focused specifically on women. Instead, the most important turning point emerged from a military supply created for wounded soldiers. A material designed to absorb blood on battlefields eventually transformed menstrual hygiene around the world. That connection sounds almost impossible until you realize how often history works this way. Many innovations reach their final destination by following completely unexpected paths. The people who created Cellucotton were not trying to change everyday life for women. The nurses who recognized its potential were not launching a global industry, yet their actions helped create one anyway. Small decisions sometimes produce consequences nobody predicts. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout history. An invention solves one problem and accidentally solves another. A product created for one purpose finds success somewhere else. A discovery made in one field transforms an entirely different industry. The history of menstrual products follows that exact pattern. Yet there is another reason this story matters. It reveals how much history can hide inside ordinary objects. Most people walk past menstrual products in stores without giving them a second thought. They appear simple, familiar, and unremarkable. Yet each package represents thousands of years of experimentation, adaptation, and innovation. Behind every modern product stands a chain of forgotten women solving practical problems long before corporations existed. Behind every modern convenience stands a history that most consumers never see. The same principle applies far beyond menstrual hygiene. Many everyday objects carry similar hidden stories. Simple inventions often emerge from decades or centuries of trial and error. The products people use without thinking frequently contain layers of history invisible to the casual observer. Once you recognize that pattern, ordinary items begin looking very different. They stop appearing ordinary at all. They become evidence of countless people working to solve recurring human problems. The history of menstruation also reveals how social attitudes can shape technology. For generations, embarrassment slowed conversations about a universal experience. Companies developed products while avoiding direct language. Customers purchased products while pretending the need did not exist. Entire advertising campaigns revolved around saying everything, accept the obvious. The technology improved steadily, but cultural attitudes changed more slowly. In many ways, the struggle against silence lasted almost as long as the search for better products. That silence helps explain why so much of this history remained hidden. Historians preserved records of battles, governments, and famous leaders. Everyday experiences often received less attention. Yet the experiences affecting millions of ordinary people frequently shape society just as powerfully. Menstrual hygiene influenced education, employment, manufacturing, retail, medicine, and public health. Its impact reached far beyond the personal level. It quietly touched almost every part of modern life. Perhaps that is the most surprising lesson of all. The story began with a simple question about what women used before pads existed. The answer turned out to be much larger than expected. It became a story about invention, adaptation, business, medicine, and cultural change. It became a story about people solving problems with whatever tools they had available. Most importantly, it became a reminder that history is often hidden in places nobody thinks to look. Sometimes, the most revealing stories are not found in palaces, battlefields, or government archives. Sometimes they are found in the ordinary objects sitting on store shelves, quietly carrying the memory of thousands of years of human experience. And once that hidden history becomes visible, it becomes impossible to look at those ordinary objects the same way again.